that shot the hell out of us and has continued to shock people is this visceral need for safe that came out the data. It's visceral. So if you go under it and you unpack it a little bit, they're just asking lots of questions. When you're scared, what do? You ask questions because you're looking for some kind of reassurance. The other thing I'd like to say is they're not afraid of hard work. They're afraid of working hard, not protecting their time and their wellness outside of work and still falling behind. What we do find is that all generations are looking to the older generations.
What I think, as I look back on our conversation and on Gen Z in general, is that Gen Z will demand that we become the leaders we should have become in the first place.
They're asking leaders to earn trust through behaviour, not through the titles that they have. And you can say no to Gen Z. That's the other thing that lots of people have sort of asked me recently. It's like not the demented teenager that you just have to be scared of and go, oh yeah, okay. It's not.
There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. All right, I cannot talk to any audience of managers or leaders about engaging their teams and their workforce and mentioned the word generational differences without getting this deluge of stress, frustration, sometimes a good bit of anger. And it often gets targeted at the youngest generation and what the youngest generation is expecting of their careers, of their visibility, of their managers, of their impact. Okay? And that seems to be true regardless which country I go to or how I introduce this topic. However, I think we have to say that Generation Z is not like generations before. Their experiences are different. What has brought them to this place is different. The world is different for them. And until we wrap our heads around where they are, we're going to struggle to figure out how to lead them in the best possible way. I happen to think, by the way, that is true for anybody that you are leading, that you have to understand where they are coming from in order to lead them well. But the one that seems to be causing the most friction at the moment is this whole notion of Generation Z. So we have some brand new data that I want to review that highlights something we haven't been talking about, Gen Z and their fears, Gen Z's mental health, the risk that Gen Z is feeling, and what therefore it means we can do as leaders that will lead them well, and of course get to the productivity that we want in our organizations. So my guest today is Jackie Cooper. She's a globally recognized brand expert and strategic advisor to the C-suite, really renowned for her ability to build growth and to drive enduring brand equity. Jackie built her own PR agency, which she sold to Edelman, and has been in a number of high-impact leadership roles in Edelman, shaping that agency's global creative and brand strategy across sectors. But she founded Edelman's Gen Z Lab and Longevity Lab as a platform to help decode the generational influence that we really need to explore. If you think about that and you're trying to future-proof your brand or increase your brand relevance or have a stronger impact, you sort of do need to be paying attention to some generational differences, not just at the youngest end, but also at the oldest end. And that's what Jackie's group does, the Edelman's Gen Z Lab and Longevity Lab. All right, with that, we're going to talk about the latest data from Edelman's Gen Z Lab. So Jackie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and a great introduction.
It's a pleasure. I love it. And I love this topic. As everybody who listens to me knows, we've done a number of podcasts on this. I don't think we can do enough because I think it is one of the hot topics leaders have to come to understand. And it's a hard one because what leaders have done isn't what they've experienced, isn't necessarily what's going to work going forward. But that's me. Jackie, for you, why do you care about Gen Z?
Well, this started actually from chairing a workshop about the future of marketing, and that was such a wide workshop title. It was for Adweek. I said, well, can we just ask all the attendees an internal workshop, what's keeping them awake at night? and there are 6 senior women CMOs in this workshop. I did not budget for them all saying Gen Z. And when we sort of said, okay, let's concentrate on that, because let the workshop be constructive on something that you actually want to fix for, the paralysis of action around Gen Z was the common theme, and a concern about understanding them. But before you kind of got to understanding them, a real fear of not understanding them and having some kind of backlash. And so after that workshop, which was so fascinating, we commissioned research, and we continue to commission and update research around Gen Z. The biggest thing that came out that shocked the hell out of us and has continued to shock people that we've shared this with is this visceral need for safety that came out of the data. It's visceral. So globally, nearly 3 in 4 Gen Z say that personal safety and security is one of their biggest concerns. Now, this data is done before this last year, which has only sort of escalated in safety, and we will be continuing to track that. But it tells you a lot about the mindset that they are in. And the biggest thing for me, I was on a panel that also triggers sort of change of kind of research and insight searching. I was on a panel on Gen Z in the workplace, and a very cross person in the audience said, I'm fed up with Gen Z, they're so entitled, why are they so entitled? And he sort of went off into one, demanding, unrealistic. But I answered him, and it actually prompted a piece that's just come out in Fast Company a few weeks ago. I answered him by saying, have you actually thought that entitlement is, if you go under it and you unpack it a little bit, they're just asking lots of questions. When you're scared, what do? You ask questions because you're looking for some kind of reassurance. And in a hierarchy of a workplace, we don't expect the lower, quote unquote, people in the workplace to have the audacity to ask a lot of questions, especially about board members or what we have as our values or what our plans are for the world. It's like you're allowed to ask about your lunch hour and where you go and get your sandwich, but you're not allowed to ask these questions. And so this is a really clear indication of how you open this podcast of the times we live in. This is like a completely different era, and we can't expect Gen Z to be changing anytime soon, because the world is a scary place, and their experience has been seeing their parents go through 2 recessions, COVID, cost of living crisis, political upheaval. And so what do we do in an unstable world? We try and protect ourselves, and Gen Z are trying to protect themselves. They're not trying to be entitled.
It's an interesting comment. I want to explore that. 3 and 4 last year, I think it would be worse today, are worried about their personal safety, and security. But I want to chase something. I'm going to come back to that one because I want to dig on that one. But I want to chase something you said before, is that we find that Gen Z asks lots of questions, and they're not the questions we expect people to ask, especially at that age. I think the interesting thing is we interpret why they're asking that question perhaps differently than what they mean by asking the question. So I can imagine a senior executive not expecting to be asked, what's our global plan for, climate change or some big issue like that, feeling a little uncomfortable with it, not knowing how to answer it, and feeling like that was an impertinent question to ask. Whereas Gen Z is just saying, I'm curious.
Yeah, I think the notion of an all-round knowledge of your part in the world is much more understood by Gen Z than previous generations, not least because obviously they've grown up with everything being at the end of a keyboard and they have a forensic ability to research, and they don't think there's any reason that they shouldn't ask the question, because the ability to have the answer, tip tip tip, tap tap tap, is there, right? And so if you're aware of your part in the world and you're concerned for the future of the planet, and you are aware of everything that's going wrong in the world, and you feel that you've got a role to play to try and make things better, you will ask questions about the company that you're working for, and values are really important to Gen Z. And so the need to actually understand the company values, not just as a sort of company mission, which is what people often think it is, but the actual board members, the way the CEO turns up to work. Gen Z is basically expecting instability, so they kind of look for clarity. They're really the first generation that's grown up assuming that the system might not actually work for them. And so they are asking questions to help them make choices, and asking questions shouldn't be interpreted as being negative. So fact-finding is okay, right? But don't punish a person for asking the questions. Right. And the other thing I'd like to say is they're not afraid of hard work. They're afraid of working hard, not protecting their time and their wellness outside of work, and still falling behind. When Gen Z asks about promotions or raises, it's often seen as, well, why are you asking that? That's, what right do you have? But what they see, what we see isn't being, obnoxious about that, but what we see is anxiety about whether their effort is actually going to lead to stability in a volatile economy. 86% of employed Gen Zers say that they fear losing their jobs due to factors beyond their control. So that might be like recession or automation. Well, if you feel you're going to lose control, the first thing you do is try to regain some control wherever you can, and that's prompted by asking questions and trying to sort of input to where you are. It's a very natural reaction, right?
Right. So one of the things I take from this conversation that I hadn't really thought about, and advice to leaders in general, is don't assume the questions that are being asked are coming from a negative place. Assume that they're coming from a place of interest, of curiosity, of fact-finding, of trying to create some sense of what can I expect here, okay? And then do your best to give an answer to that, because I think that helps provide the stability. All right, so I think that's one big takeaway for me from this one. The second one is something I had not seen. There's so much written about Gen Z as wanting clear transparency. One of the drivers, I think, for them as being lonely and looking for social connection in some interesting ways. But you're the only one I know who talks about this overwhelming sense of insecurity. Personal insecurity, financial insecurity, well-being insecurity. And that has big implications for everything else. It's like, it feels like that's a root cause that we have to pay attention to. So let's unpack that one for a minute, because I think it's really important. First off, you said 3 and 4 are worried about personal safety and security. And you said it was global data. Do you see any differences around the globe? Is this a Western phenomena or a general phenomena?
It's a general phenomenon. I think the thing about Gen Z is they're more connected globally through being on social spaces, again, than any other generation growing up. So if you think about the world of entertainment or creators or, social connections, music stars, all the stuff in popular culture, all the stuff in the sort of TikTok experiences across how they get their news or how they learn about things or how they tap into trends, they're not really aware of geographical differences in terms of how they engage socially. We do see a rise in nationalism, an interest in across all generations, and an interest in being more local. As things get worse, people tend to sort of go back to being local, and that notion of the sort of multinational firm and is actually being contrasted with a focus on going to local companies, local communities, local support. And obviously you've got so much happening in the US now that is changing how people feel about nationalism each day as we sit here. But really, for Gen Z, they do have a really clear idea that the world writ large is affecting them. And then they have a very clear idea that their local small world is the challenge for them. Are they going to have the money, this is the first generation that's going to be less well off than their parents. Generally, we see growth and we see a trend of doing sort of better than what's gone before. This is not the case for Gen Z. The cost of living crisis is real. Their ability to be homeowners is massively challenged. The rise of mental health issues is well documented. And so this is sort of interesting also that generally, not just Gen Z, but for Gen Z too, there is a lot of trust in your employer. While all of the outside world becomes very challenged and very difficult, the nearness of your own workplace and your own CEO and your own employer becomes very, very important. And that's also why Gen Z are asking questions, because that's so important to them. They're looking for the reassurance of what they are a part of, making sure that that's something that's going to help them have the optimum life, the safest life. We see in the trust barometer that nearly 9 in 10 Gen Z say that businesses are obligated to provide good paying, stable jobs and supportive working conditions, which includes mental well-being. But we're not saying that employers have to be therapists, but they are responsible for the environment that people work in. And Gen Z are a little more vocal in asking for systems and structure that helps them have less stress. They want their expectations to be very clear. They're very aware of burnout. They're much more aware of work-life balance. So asking about time off, or asking about better pay, or asking about what the values are, it's not about, again, just, well, this is all about me, but they are understanding that this world that they're in is a marathon, not a sprint, and how can they be best equipped? And how do they make the choices? You know, I'm old enough that my parents would be in a job, a career for their life. The average Gen Zer will have 7 to 10 careers. So this is, you know, and some of those will be simultaneous. So you'll see that Gen Zers do have this attitude of, well, maybe I'll hustle on the side, or this is a passion of mine, maybe I can make this work. It's a very much, I'm responsible for myself and I'm responsible for my world, and therefore I'm going to ask questions of the system that you put me in. And I do think this is healthy for them, because if you don't feel you have control, you really are actually sort of going to have higher stress levels. And this is obviously something they're trying to avoid in a very stressful world. The world's already really bloody stressful.
Well, there's several pieces of this one that just are I think, hugely insightful, Jackie. If you think, so yes, we know the employee contract of you were going to work here for the next how many ever decades is gone. That's been gone for ages, and we know that. We don't really expect people to move as rapidly as, you know, younger generations are moving, but okay, we should. But there was always this contract that says work hard, save your money, buy a home, settle down, become a part of the community, have your neighbors and friends, raise a family. I mean, I gave a very stereotypical view of what many people would say they aspired to. And the pull for that was work hard, save your money, get established. Okay? If you feel like you're never going to get established because it's beyond your reach, suddenly that social contract of what am I doing and why am I doing it at work kind of begins to disappear. And that is a fundamental changer in how we've always motivated people in some ways. Do you think I'm off base here?
Yeah, I think they still have an element of what was before, but I think that what we hear from them is genuinely more questions, just more questions about why am I doing this? And those questions are personal, but they're also like corporate. Why are we doing this? Why am I doing this? Where are we going with this? What's the point of doing this? Gen Zers, I used to work for Greenpeace many, many years ago, and I was told by the absolutely brilliant guy that was running Greenpeace at the time, he said, we know we can't change the world, but we know we can aggravate enough that we help make changes. And I think that's the same about Gen Z. They know that they aren't going to change the whole world. They're super aware that they're the younger generation on their way up, but they also know that if they don't speak and they don't articulate and they don't poke, nothing's going to change. And so they are also aware that they're going to need to stay in the job for job security. They are also aware, to what I said earlier, that that could be threatened by automation or recession. I have a younger daughter who's 25. Many of her friends who are all super academic, super smart, all went to university, just happened to be in a group of really smart girls, which I find amazing because I did not go to university and I'm academically inept. But I'm watching their career path and it's extremely challenging because they're often staying in a job that makes them really miserable. And I was saying to you that this morning I was looking at some of your posts, which I just absolutely love, the way that you bundle up everything in your posts and the advice is so clear. And one of them was, don't think you need to stay in a job for a year if it's making you miserable. Give really good reasons as to go. Well, that bunch of girls do not feel they can do that. They feel they have to stay in a job for at least a year because it won't look good on their CV. So I don't think we should go down the route of thinking that Gen Z is just going, like, it's all about me standing up for my values. If I don't like it, I'm walking out. I'm going to question the CEO. I'm going to give you shit if you don't do what I want you to do. It's not that at all. It's the awareness in the mind might not always deliver the action because they have to balance the action with a real fear to the earlier point of security. We had 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds in the US telling us that they were saving up for medical insurance because they didn't want to go through what they saw their parents go through. Oh, wow. There's a high proportion of Gen Zers who invest in crypto, in ISAs. I mean, there is a caution here. There is a protective caution here to be financially safe. Okay. To your point of where you saw the safety, and that safety means that they are going to have some of those behaviours that previous generations have had. They are going to be cautious if they're in a job that they're happy in. And as I've been asked so many times, well, this isn't one group, Jackie. This is, how can you generalise? It's like, okay, look. On the one hand, I'm talking about the data that we find, which is generalised because it's across the world data. And on the other, I hope it's coming across that I'm matching it with insights that we're having from workshops, from the 400 Gen Zers we have around the world. And within that, there's so much texture. The biggest thing is it's not homogenous, but the fear is real. That is definitely the one consistent underpinning factor.
Yeah, and what would make me, there's just so many implications that come out of understanding this fear. And why you would ask questions, as you've been rightly talking about, why you would emphasize local, because that gives you a stronger sense of control and a stronger sense of somebody is going to look out for me. I think we're about to go into an era where the manager is the driving force for lots of things. So that relationship with that manager, I think, is increasingly important. Sorry, dear managers, but I think that's an important thing that's happening. And you've got in the larger context, am I proud of the company that I'm working for? I think this is sustainable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you also have, I want to highlight one other thing, this whole notion of personal safety. Like, can I walk down the street? In the U.S., am I likely to get arrested because I look like I'm an immigrant or I have a funny name or something? If I'm of a different community, am I going to be safe walking where, even in my neighborhood, there's so many personal safety issues. Is somebody going to bomb my neighborhood? I mean, there's just so many happening in the world. So that safety, and if you think about being that afraid, even though the drivers of what you're afraid of will vary, that fear will change behavior, and it will ask you to, you will look for different things than other people have before. So I know that employers can't control all of that, but being aware of it certainly strikes me as a really important factor for understanding how to work with this generation. All right, I want to dig into a shift from safety and fear to talk about knowledge versus experience. Okay, so Tim Elmore has made a big deal about this one to say that this generation has more knowledge than any other generations before because the information is at your fingertip, but they have less experience. What's your research saying about this distinction between knowledge and experience?
It's such a brilliant point because it brings in the longevity lab where we look at the bookends of the data and we see that Gen Z have influence, but the longevity generation that we look at, which is 55 to 72, predominantly have the wisdom. There's a really interesting relationship between Gen Z and the 55 pluses, because Gen Z look to that generation for guidance and knowledge, and then that generation looks to the Gen Z for understanding how to consume content, understanding how to play in social media. So there's a really interesting, as our brilliant global strategist Courtney Miller talks about, the bookend behaviour of these two sort of playing with each other. And of course you can fast track with AI and all the socials information, but nothing can beat living it, and you can't fast track wisdom. And so what we do find is that all generations are looking to the older generations for that experience, wisdom, and I think that's a brilliant opportunity for businesses who can show empathy and access to a wise older cohort in the workplace. If you talk about this with Chip Conley, who's a renowned author and runs workshops for the Modern Elder Academy, who've partnered with us on the longevity generation, he talks about both generations being mentors and both generations being mentees.
Love it.
And he talked about his stint at Airbnb, where he was the older person with the wisdom, but he was also the younger person that needed the younger person to give them and him and his team insight into how that sort of nomadic digital native community was working, for example. And so it's very much that mutual sort of fluidity between these two generations. Super Age, who we partner with the Longevity Lab and Target 55 plus, found that of their over 1 million subscribers, about a third are 35 and over. Is that what's behind that? And they're looking for wisdom. So they know that they're not that age yet, but they want to understand the wisdom and the experience of that age. So it's learning from other generations, and where we've put in some of our work, workshops where we've mixed the provocation of the questions of Gen Z with the wisdom and the calmness of the older generation, but then in return the older generation have so many questions for Gen Z. It's actually a wonderful thing.
I love it.
Safe, that's the key, is to make people feel safe, because you're a little vulnerable as a Gen Zer, and you're a little vulnerable as an older person to say what you don't know in a workplace. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've again posted, see, I've swallowed the Wanda world, about, not being scared to ask questions, which is such a great push, but lots of people are scared to ask questions. And when you're older, you don't want to admit that you don't know so much about social behaviour. Right. And when you're younger, you don't want to admit that you're actually petrified of tomorrow. So that sort of play between the two generations has been fantastic. And the reassurance that you do have permission as a Gen Zer to ask, and it won't reflect on you. Because again, if you can all find everything on a keyboard, is there any excuse therefore to not know stuff? Yes, there is. You haven't got the experience to go behind it, but that may be not always sort of welcomed.
Not always easy. I can see companies doing a new mentoring kind of program. Where they take their older generations, some of whom have retired and would still love to come back and be involved and engaged, and pairing them up with the youngest employees, kind of for a meet and greet or a workshop or a kind of small, I can imagine this sort of small coaching thing that happens, and see what pops out of it, who wants to continue to stay in touch. I can imagine that would be really, really fun. And can I just say, from somebody who is clearly over 55, I won't talk about the number beyond that, white hair says something, hallelujah, finally.
Well, I'm way over 55, but I haven't been brave enough to keep my grey hair. And I think that it's amazing that whenever I post on the Longevity Lab, I get the most incredible outpouring of people saying their versions of Hallelujah. But that's fantastic, and that's obviously in a way a whole other conversation, but relevant to Gen Z. The mentoring mentee thing, to your point about such a need in businesses, is so untapped. And so I would definitely say you just need to try it, as you said, in a small way, in a safe place, and an exchange of views, and make it funny, make it, it can be nuanced, it can be profound. it's good to kind of have some questions. So we always sort of structure this by, let's have 5 questions each. And honestly, magic happens for all of the people who are in the room, because we are all humans, but we are at different stages and we are having different experiences, and we can't shove someone else's experience who's 60 into someone's head who's 15, going on 20, going on 30. And so from interns, right, you know, even at universities and schools, we've been looking at how to share what's going on, and it becomes wonderful instead of irritating, and that's been the best thing.
Well, I personally find, and I know many people that I spend time with, find the energy from the younger generation exciting. It's a little bit unnerving on occasion, but to some. But it's exciting to be around that energy. And so finding a merge between those two just makes a ton of sense to me. If I'm thinking about a brand, it makes a ton of sense, but also in terms of leadership and mentoring and career, great idea. Great idea. I give you credit for it, but I'm now talking to all my clients about how important that is. Let's talk about another topic with Gen Z, which is loneliness. Tons written, tons of research all across the world about how this generation is lonelier than ever before. What is your data saying on this one?
It's really humbling and worrying that we found that young people today spend roughly 1,000 fewer hours per year socializing in person than previous cohorts, which has real implications for belonging in life and at work. I also was in a workshop a couple of weeks before Christmas, and one of the leaders told me that when they were in a room of Gen Zers, no one could look at them in the eye. And I since have read this. Came back that sort of notion of being, because they're not used to being in a room, looking at you, you know, straight on, feeling comfortable with what happens in that sort of social dynamic. And of course, they may go home or, you know, be on their journey home and log on and have thousands of followers, but they don't know anyone, and they don't have friends, and they don't have the experience of knowing how to make close relationships, you know, at work. It's really, really, you know, important that that we help Gen Zers understand how to be in the world. What I'm comforted by, and I've seen it particularly as we've all come back to work, there is a definite trend, and I will really want us to look at this data-wise. There's a definite trend towards in real life. And so maybe we will start to, you know, cultural moments for people to have experience of are really exploding by brands, for example. And brands are understanding now that they can't just be in content with a creator in social space. Something has to happen anyway for that creator to post something in that social space. So better to have a double whammy of having something happening in real life in which you have an actual experience, and then what you're posting and the content that's coming out of that has got so much more soul and vivacity and feeling and emotion, and that of course in turn is so much more emotionally engaging and real. And so that works for the brand, but it also works for the participant. And so, you know, we also hear lots of phrases from our Gen Zs like, I'm taking a TikTok holiday. So they're just basically taking, you know, or why, and it's often the Gen Zers now who round dinner are saying, put your phones away. We don't want any phones at dinner. And so there is this backlash to the isolation that they're feeling from everything being on social networks. And hopefully that 1,000 fewer hours per year socializing will start to go down, because I think that, you know, the mental health connection is very clear with the lack of socialization and lack of close friends.
That's interesting. 1,000 fewer hours per year socializing in person. 1,000. That's a lot. It's a lot of days. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of isolation.
And it's a lot of experience that you're not having. So if you think about, if you've had a bad day and then you go and have a drink with someone after work, and your whole dynamic changes and it literally feels different. That's going to be different from just looking at other Instagram posts, people saying, if you've had a bad day, do this. And so I would really hope that businesses look to, really make this a bit more of a positive experience. 9 in 10 Gen Zers say that they feel businesses are obligated to give them great working conditions. I'm not sure that Gen Zers are actually asking for this kind of socialization. In the data, they're looking for good pay, stable jobs, and supportive working conditions. But I think if we were to unpack going forward what supportive working conditions meant, if we had more in real life connection, that loneliness feeling would be reduced.
Well, in fairness, I have 2 comments about this on the loneliness. In fairness, Gen Z got a bad rap because they're starting their working life just at the moment that COVID is happening. So most of them are starting in their parents' basement or in an isolated single studio somewhere in a city, and they got 5 people there and everybody's trying to ignore each other so they can work. There's none of that coming together in cohort group that gets started when you first work and then carries you frequently for the next 20 years, because those are the people you still connect with in some way. So they miss that one. There's also data from Josh Freeman, 6seconds.org, again global, about emotional intelligence, and that this generation's decline in emotional intelligence is dramatic. And if you think about the isolation, you think about the loneliness, you think about the security, how can your emotional intelligence be high?
I mean, it's a very interesting point about what role do employers have now. Because that's sort of, I'm at work from 9 to 5 and then I'm going home. And so my life will be split between what I do at work and what I do at home. And you brought up COVID. During COVID, everything merged. We suddenly got to see people in their workplace. I remember in the early days of COVID doing a call with one of our New York strategists, who was a kick-ass, amazing strategist, but New York being so expensive, her call was curled up on her bed that was her studio, and she was stuck in that studio. And I thought, how is she going to be creative and strategically brilliant stuck in this room? I mean, that's just, and so she changed her life. She changed after, as many people did, moved out, got more space, access to a garden. But what COVID did was it merged home and work together. What social media has done has merged home and work together. What hybrid working has done is merge home and work together. And so we have to be super careful about how it might merge and be good, but it also can merge and be bad. And therefore, you have to think about your role as an employer is, how can we help companies, how can we help our employees as a company come to work and have a better time? So in Edelman, London, during COVID, we moved out of an old office and moved into a new office, and of course it didn't go to time plan. We were in an interim office that was absolutely hellish, and the company did a sort of questionnaire on how many people would come back to work and be in the office, and there was one answer. And then we built these lovely new offices that I'm sitting in today, and twice as many people now come to work. Now that's fantastic, except that we didn't have enough desks, so we've had to have another sort of little, rethink on where you sit and how do you get into a meeting room. But when you actually talk to people about why they come to work, I use this word about osmosis. You can't get that osmosis of learning, having someone lift you up, having someone sort of just notice that you might just need a cup of tea. You can't do that working from home. You can only do that when you've got colleagues around you. Yeah. And the efficiency, creativity and positivity about what you win together, what you solve together, how you get through a good day and celebrate, how you get through a bad day and commiserate, that's only going to happen when you're in the office. So employers do have, I think, to rethink what those employees need to be happy in their workplace and also give their best self. So like we have a cafe here and we subsidise lunches, and that's a cost of living help, that's a health help, that's a just come downstairs and stand in your line and talk to other people during the day help. And it's the small things can sometimes have the biggest impact, and we do need to think about life as a whole in the workplace, not just workplace and then life.
Yes. I've been on that one for a long time, that you can't just treat your employees, I don't care the generation, as if they are output engines who come to produce output and not care anything else about their whole life. That you've got to look at the whole now in ways we never really thought we needed to do in the past. My astute friends in the real estate world who are advising companies about rebuilding the office workplace, particularly in a way to attract people back to work, have talked about exactly what you've talked about, this need to have a gathering spot. And that one of the biggest drivers is having a really good coffee shop with a good barista who makes a personal connection with everybody. And then you stand around and you chat and you have an exchange, you have a conversation, and you're right, it's a lift up in the day. It just feels more connected, feels less lonely. So I think you've said at the beginning that we're not asking employers to become therapists, but we are asking employers to think about the structures, the processes that give people a better experience, a more connected experience of work, an opportunity to find mentors. I'll go back to the generational differences. Okay, now on that vein, what else do you advise employers to think about?
I think one of the things that has really come through in the last few months is for leaders to sort of take Gen Z's behaviour personally. Don't do that, because their questions, their boundaries, their insistence on transparency, none of that is about undermining authority. It's about surviving and succeeding in this world that sort of feels so volatile, as we've talked about. So if the leaders can sort of move past that sort of perceived defensiveness and get curious instead, they often realise that, in a way, Gen Z is pushing leadership to be healthier. They're asking leaders to earn trust through behaviour, not through the titles that they have. And, you know, you can say no to Gen Z. That's the other thing that lots of people have sort of asked me recently. It's like not the demented teenager that you just have to be scared of and go, oh, yeah, okay. It's not that. Just because they're asking the questions, it doesn't mean to say that you have to say yes. And by the way, they're not expecting you to say yes. They're just expecting you to answer. And so it's not to be fearful or paralysed by, you know, some uncomfortable conversations. Uncomfortable conversations can lead to extremely brilliant solutions, and maybe ones that as older leaders we would not have thought of. And so we really kind of want people to explain the why, you know, not just the what. We think that where we have feedback being facilitated and it's not loaded, it's just feedback, that's very welcome. People talk about open door, but I don't think people really, a lot of people, not just Gen Z, believe in open door. You've probably got some really good insight around that, Wanda. But, you know, check-ins, predictable check-ins. Gen Z want structure. They want to know that they've got licensed, this is a Wednesday on the first Wednesday of every month and I'm allowed to whatever, and be really clear about the trade-offs and constraints. So you can say, look, we can't do this as a company. I agree with you, it would be amazing if we could change the world and have this sustainable campaign going, but you have to understand where we are is this. We'll take on board what you're saying, we'll keep it in mind, but right now we can't do that because of this. That's fine. Being listened to and recognised is absolutely everything, and that sort of open-ended two-way conversation doesn't mean you're equal, it just means that you're sharing. And I think that's where some people kind of get it wrong. It's like, I don't want them to have so much responsibility for the firm. It's like, no, they don't, but just let them be heard and let them understand that their voice is just as important. It might not change your strategy, it might change your strategy, but at least you're all aware of what this younger cohort want. And by the way, they're not so young. I mean, you've got senators, you've got positions of authority now in Gen Z, and they are understanding how to use social networking. They are understanding how to reach out from their workplace and post. And so again, that sort of separation between the person who's sitting behind their desk and the person who's on the bus on the journey home is gone. And we really need to, I think, have these people in the marketing of our firms, because quite often we're trying to market to Gen Z and we don't have Gen Zs on the team. So again, we're trying to encourage people. We had a CEO when we launched the Gen Z Lab, and on it, to be really honest, I thought it was a quite fun idea that our creative team came up with, and I thought it's great for a bit of conversation, provocation. Actually, it became much more than that. And we were talking to quite a few clients about putting their own CEO into their firm. So what does that mean? That's just a really well cast, and we've got sort of casting notes on who that should be, but a well cast Gen Zer who can have these predictable check-ins which reach the C-suite, so they're just aware of what that cohort is asking and what that cohort is thinking. It doesn't mean they're on the board, but it does mean they have access to leadership to let them know a pulse of this very important generation as it becomes more and more authoritative.
I can see that. Jackie, there are so many pearls of wisdom in here. What I think, as I look back on our conversation and on Gen Z in general, is that Gen Z will demand that we become the leaders we should have become in the first place, I believe.
Nice
I
way.
believe they're going to force us to pay attention. If we're going to do it well, they're going to force us to pay attention to all the things we know we've needed to do as leaders, understand individuals, understand something about their personal life, not just their work life, understand what motivates them, understand what their fears are, understand what's keeping them awake at night, like the security and fear and so on, and collectively come together, align around where we're going and why we're going in a particular direction to harness the power of the whole. I mean, that's the script, isn't it, for how to win? The difference is that I think Gen Z is going to be more vocal in how we get there. So I think we should tune into them. This notion of they're feeling more afraid, more fear than other generations. They have had less and continue to have less social interaction time than in the past. Their emotional health is not as strong. Their emotional intelligence is not as strong as in prior generations. They want to know, but they know they lack wisdom, so they're seeking that level of wisdom. They're looking for a supportive work environment, which doesn't mean coddled or entitled. It means cared for, connected, a place that kind of I feel can lift me up. It's an interesting one. I believe they want feedback, and you just said that, but we're going to have to give them good feedback as opposed to generic improve your executive presence feedback, which doesn't have any meaning whatsoever. So I think that what they're asking for is actually a really good thing. The question is, can we get over taking it personally as leaders and embrace what the conversation now could actually look like? So, Jackie, what brilliant insight, and I love the work that you're doing at the Edelman Gen Z Lab and Longevity Lab. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to find you?
Best way is through the edelman.com website. There is a wealth of information on that data that I've referenced, or on LinkedIn, of course. So either way, if you want the data, or edelman.com. If you want me, LinkedIn.
Okay, fabulous. Jackie, loved the conversation. What great work. Keep it going. We're going to have you come back and talk about an update on all of this.
Thank you
For
so
all
much.
of our listeners out there, join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. You can watch this conversation, if you like, on YouTube at Out of the Comfort Pod. We love to hear from our listeners. Pile those questions on any social media form you like. We're out there. Send me a direct email. Respond to the website for the show, outofthecomfortzone.com. And we'd love to hear from you. See you next week.